A time comes in the life of every race when people are driven by echoes of the past to chart a course for an exalted future. Africa is at this threshold, as major actors in the Africa arena plot a renaissance towards common destiny. Let's pedal across the streams of yesterday, from the backstreets of Africa to the defining roles of policymakers, the political realities of the African nation, balance of power, and the strive to sustain national interest and identity. Join us on Network Africa on Channels Television. Network Africa, the rallying point for the emergence of a new Africa.
Hello and welcome to Network Africa. This week, Nigeria gets the thumbs up from the United States government on how it's been handling the Ebola virus.
About 8 people right now. They are all very firmly integrated into the Emergency Operations Center here.
Then Africa Union peacekeeping mission in Somalia travels to regions to assess the worsening humanitarian situation in the Horn of the African nation and also tries to understand the reality on ground.
We do need to work hard to make sure that there's a more accessibility whereby humanitarian and the government NGOs are even within the community to be moving freely from one side to another.
Also, the murder of Michael Brown causes such tension in Ferguson, Missouri, that Egypt urges the United States to show restraint.
And as someone who's from South Central LA, I know everyone's concerned about the murder of Mike Brown in Missouri.
And South Sudanese designers use fashion to appeal for peace and reconciliation. Hello and welcome to Network Africa with me, Cynthia Are. Let's begin in Nigeria, where despite the fact that the battle against the spread of Ebola is still on, there is relative calm now that 4 cases have not only been ruled out, but the government has also received a thumbs up from the United States based on how the situation has been handled. The U.S. Consul General, Mr. Jeffrey Hawkins, conveyed the appreciation of the American government and also explained the collaborative role of the United States Center for Disease Control with other medical experts to curb the Ebola virus disease. Sadly, this comes as the medical profession and Nigerians are mourning the head of operations of First Consultant Hospital, Lagos, who contracted the Ebola virus disease from the index case, Mr. Patrick Sawyer. This brings the total number of Ebola virus-related deaths in Nigeria to 5, including the Liberian American.
About 8 people right now. They are all very firmly integrated into the Emergency Operations Center here. And we've been able to provide expertise in a number of different areas across the spectrum from general response to outbreaks such as this one, to port health security, to protective personal equipment, across a whole range of areas. And again, taking leadership from the Nigerian side and figuring out what they need.
The effective treatment involves monitoring the patient at the facility, looking at things like the amount of fluid that they need, looking at whether they need electrolytes, other issues that come up with the patient through their course of disease that can be managed. And if those services are provided, the number of people who survive the disease goes up considerably. And so it's been very reassuring that those patients have been receiving that care and that care has resulted in some of them being able to go home. There's actually a very specific plan that is followed before a patient is discharged. And by the time the patient is discharged, they're not at risk of transmitting the disease within the community. I would hope communities would welcome people back and be glad that they have them coming out of the facility, knowing that they, like other diseases, that they went through the disease, they survived it, and they're not a risk to the community. They're part of the community.
Now, Liberia has imposed a nighttime curfew and has quarantined an area of the capital, Monrovia, in a bid to halt the deadly Ebola outbreak. President Ellen Sirleaf said the curfew would be from 2100 local time to 600. She said all movement would be blocked in and out of the West Point area. Now let's take a moment to examine how the virus is being handled in the affected countries, as well as its implication on structures.
2 food trucks with provisions for thousands of families stock went into quarantine areas on Tuesday as the country battles to control an Ebola epidemic that has so far claimed over 1,200 people in the region. As part of the increased international response, WFP is stepping up emergency food deliveries to the quarantine areas, which include severely affected regions such as Bomi and Foya in Liberia. Fears of the disease and quarantine measures such as military and police roadblocks have stopped farmers from reaching their fields, and food output has dropped, raising fears that a famine could set in on top of the deadly illness.
Operation has been quite intense, and we intend to scale up as the need arises. Basically, what you can see here, if you take it into any of the other affected countries, you will see also similar operations going on. And we intend to be very proactive and react instead of reactive to the situation.
Meanwhile, in Nigeria, the health minister believes the country has had some success in treating Ebola using traditional supportive care methods like those used to treat a female doctor who was the first Nigerian to contract the deadly virus. However, he also mentioned that he has now ruled out the use of the experimental treatment nanosilver, but is still looking to the possibility of using other untested drugs.
And then on Saturday, early by 5 a.m., they told me, well, that it didn't pass the standards in our National Health Research Ethics Code. So I then didn't approve. So no patient has received it, but the bottom line is that we're not using it since it did not pass through the National Health Research Ethics Committee.
Nigeria is actively seeking supplies of experimental drugs from the World Health Organization and the US. But the United States believes that Nigeria ought to concentrate more on the spread of Ebola by laying emphasis on isolation and screening. James Entwistle reminded officials that the drug that had been administered in some cases was experimental and that there were no huge quantities of it at present.
Those are exactly what you said, experimental. And we'll see down the road what is possible, but there are not huge quantities now, and we think the focus now needs to be on exactly what you're doing. The isolation ward, screening, and especially important, and your government is doing a very good job on this, is contact tracing.
In Sierra Leone, security has also been beefed up as the country tries to enforce stringent measures put in place by the president to stop the spread of the severe Ebola outbreak. Freetown, the capital, sees a relatively low number of cases compared to severely affected cities like Kenema and Kailaon. But residents are still fearful the disease, which has spread like wildfire in the Liberian capital, Monrovia, can get a serious foothold in this city.
Initially, we have thought that the epidemic will be controlled and stopped in these 2 districts, Kailaon and Kenema. But it has gone beyond all of the districts in Sierra Leone. It is now in 11 out of the 12 districts. So what WFP has done is that we have stepped out our intervention beyond Kailaon and Kenema by providing quarantine families with the basic food need.
The WHO said it was working with the UN's WFP to ensure food delivery to around 1 million people living in Ebola quarantine zones, cordoned off by local security forces in a border zone of Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone.
For Sierra Leone, the intention is to reach 400,000 beneficiaries because we know that the Ebola outbreak has affected the livelihood of the people of Sierra Leone. And we think that even beyond the control of the outbreak, there will be severe food shortage since farmers are unable to continue with cultivation.
While countries like Nigeria might be doing quite well in handling the spread of the virus and getting a thumbs up from the United States on how it's addressing Ebola, the newly appointed UN senior official for Ebola, Dr. David Nabarro, warns that the deadly disease was adversely impacting social structures and that fighting it would require a comprehensive support operation between different agencies.
This disease is affecting how societies work. It's affecting the social setting. It's affecting economies. It's affecting governance. It's got humanitarian consequences. It's got political repercussions. It may have security impacts. And so a really comprehensive support operation is necessary that involves all the different assets, tools, capacities in our United Nations system.
Without a doubt, the disease is impacting largely on structures, but the World Health Organization doesn't believe it should impact heavily on the aviation sector, as the risk of transmission of Ebola virus during air travel remains low.
WHO is not recommending any travel restriction. When decisions are made by airline companies, they have to take into consideration their perceived risk and the real economic impact on countries that are already affected by a disease that they have to control.
However, some airlines have decided to stop flying to the affected countries. Kenya Airways, one of Africa's major airlines, has suspended flights to Liberia's capital, Monrovia, and Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown. The suspension of the flight started at midnight on Tuesday. The carrier, which is part-owned by Air France KLM, flies a total of 7 times a week to the two cities through Accra. The company said it took the decision on the advice of Kenya's Ministry of Health, which is keen to prevent the importation of a case of Ebola into the country. Ebola is one of the world's most deadly diseases and kills the majority of those infected. Its symptoms include internal and external bleeding, diarrhea, and vomiting. It has killed at least 1,145 people in 4 African nations: Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Nigeria.
Now, when we come back on Network Africa, we'll take a look at how the death of a U.S. teenager, Michael Brown, has caused such a stir that Egypt is calling for restraints on the part of the United States.
If you want to know what's trending or you miss your favorite live shows, you can watch it all on our YouTube channel. Simply log on to www.youtube.com/channelsweb. Scroll down to your favorite program and click play. You can also view all uploaded videos by clicking on View All. Don't forget to subscribe and get the latest videos. If they are interesting, like them and be heard. Get connected with the channel's television YouTube page. The news at your fingertips.
Welcome back. You're still tuned to Network Africa. Let's take a moment to find out what's happening in the rest of the world.
U.S. aircraft have launched fresh strikes against Islamic State militants in northern Iraq, despite threats from the group to kill a second American captive in retribution. On Tuesday, the group released a video showing the beheading of journalist James Foley, who went missing back in 2012. In it, the militants threatened to kill another U.S. reporter they're holding.
When people harm Americans anywhere, we do what's necessary to see that justice is done. And we act against ISIL, standing alongside others. The people of Iraq, who with our support are taking the fight to ISIL, must continue coming together to expel these terrorists from their communities.
Then an Israeli airstrike on a house in Gaza has killed 3 senior Hamas military commanders. Mohammed Abu Shamala, Mohammed Barhoum, and Raed al-Attar died in the attack near the southern town of Rafah. They were among 6 people killed a day after